My husband is in the army, and I am in the last month of pregnancy. I asked my mother to come and help me after the birth, but she said she was not going to be my maid. I'm Emily, 8 months pregnant, and every morning I wake up with a heavier belly and a heavier heart. My husband, Jake, is in the military. He's been active duty for most of our relationship, and while I've always known that came with sacrifices, I never imagined that one of them would be him missing the birth of our first child. Our son, Caleb, is due in just a few weeks, and I'm doing everything I can to prepare myself to bring him into the world without the one person I want most by my side. Jake has been stationed overseas for the past 6 months, and we'd held on to hope for the longest time that he might be granted leave for the birth. We talked about it constantly, on every call, in every letter, in every message we managed to send through the mess of different time zones and terrible Wi-Fi. He kept saying, "I'll fight for it, Em. I'll do everything I can." And I believed him because I know my husband and I know how badly he wants to be there, to hold my hand, to cut the cord, to meet his son the moment he takes his first breath. But a few days ago Jake called me, and the moment I heard his voice I knew. He didn't even need to say the words, but he did, softly, painfully. His command denied the leave. There's no more room for appeals, no backup plan, no miracle exception. He's not coming home. I sat on the edge of our bed after that call, surrounded by folded baby clothes and unopened diapers, and cried so hard I thought I might actually go into labor right then and there. Not because I'm not strong enough to do this, I know I am, but because it wasn't supposed to be like this. We're supposed to be a team. We built this life together, and now I'm walking into the hardest day of my life with half my heart thousands of miles away. We live 800 miles away from our family, tucked into a quiet little base town that feels even smaller now that I'm this far along and mostly alone. The plan from the beginning was for my mom, Cynthia, to fly in and stay with me for a few weeks before and after the birth, to help out with everything from hospital rides to holding the baby so I could sleep for more than 30 minutes at a time. It wasn't a perfect plan. My mom and I have always had a complicated relationship, but it was what we had, and I clung to it like a lifeline when Jake told me he couldn't come home. We had to pay for her tickets ourselves, something that still sits in the back of my throat like a lump I can't swallow. She always complains about money, how the bills are piling up, how everything's too expensive, how she's barely getting by, and while I understand that, truly I do, it's been exhausting trying to be the one who's pregnant, emotionally raw, and still expected to handle everyone else's needs and moods. Jake and I scraped together the money, moving things around, delaying some baby purchases, telling ourselves it was worth it if it meant I wouldn't have to go through labor and the terrifying days after completely on my own. I booked her flights, sent her the itinerary, and even arranged for a neighbor to help pick her up from the airport if I went into labor early. I did everything I could to make it easy for her, to make her feel welcomed and needed, because despite all our history, I wanted her here. I needed her here. And I truly believed that she understood how much this meant. I always had this quiet, gnawing feeling that my mom wouldn't be able to show up in the way I needed her to, not really. Deep down, I think I've always known that she struggles to be supportive when the spotlight isn't on her. She's the kind of person who somehow finds a way to make every situation orbit around her, whether it's something as small as a dinner out or as big as a life milestone. When Jake and I announced our engagement, barely 5 minutes into the joy and congratulations, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Well, I'm not paying for the wedding," as if that was the only thing that mattered, as if our happiness was an inconvenience to her. It wasn't just what she said, it was the tone, the way she said it, like a warning, like we were already burdening her with our decisions. I remember the air being sucked out of the room, the quiet shift in Jake's expression, and how I smiled and nodded and tried to move on, because I didn't want to start a fight or let her ruin the moment. That's always been the pattern. I learned to lower my expectations around her a long time ago, to brace myself for disappointment while still hoping that maybe this time, things would be different. So when she agreed to come help during the birth, I tried to bury those old feelings. I told myself maybe she was finally ready to be the kind of mom I needed. But part of me, the part that remembers that engagement moment all too clearly, never fully believed it. On the advice of my therapist, I decided to have an honest conversation with my mother before she arrived, something I had been avoiding out of fear that it would go sideways, but I knew it had to be done. My therapist had gently reminded me that setting clear expectations could prevent bigger disappointments later, and that while I couldn't control how my mother responded, I could at least make my needs known. So I picked up the phone, heart pounding, and called her one evening, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I explained that after the birth I was going to be physically and emotionally exhausted, and I would likely need help with everyday things, cooking simple meals, doing some light cleaning, helping with the laundry, and maybe even rocking the baby while I got a quick nap or shower. I wasn't asking for anything extravagant, just the basics, just the kind of help most new moms need when they're recovering and adjusting. I told her I wasn't expecting to be waited on, but that I wouldn't be able to host her like a guest either. For a second there was silence on the other end of the line, and I hoped, desperately, that maybe she would hear the vulnerability in my voice, maybe even surprise me with reassurance. I wanted her to say something like, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need." But even before she spoke, I could feel the familiar tension creeping in, that old ache in my chest that always comes from asking my mom for anything. I made it clear, as gently but firmly as I could, that she was coming here as a mother first, not just as a grandmother. I told her that while I knew she was excited to meet her grandson and be part of those sweet first moments, what I needed from her went beyond cradling a newborn and taking cute photos. I needed her support, not just in presence but in action. I needed her to step in where I would be too sore, too tired, or too overwhelmed to function. I told her I didn't want to be the one crawling around the house in pain, trying to fold laundry or reheat meals, while she rocked the baby and waited to be served. This wasn't going to be a vacation for anyone, least of all me. I needed someone who would be by my side, not above me, not on the sidelines, but actually helping. I said it calmly, choosing every word with care, but it still felt like walking a tightrope, balancing honesty with the constant fear that she'd take it as criticism or attack. And even as I spoke, part of me wondered if she heard what I was really saying, that I was scared, that I felt alone, that I needed her to be the kind of mother I never really had growing up. Just this once. Just for a little while. She laughed. Not a light chuckle or an awkward giggle, but one of those sharp, dismissive laughs that immediately made me feel small, like I was ridiculous for even bringing it up. "I'm not your maid," she said flatly, as if what I'd asked for was some outrageous list of demands instead of the bare minimum support any daughter should be able to count on after giving birth. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, stunned into silence for a moment, my stomach tightening with a mix of anger and sadness. Before I could even respond, she was already shifting the narrative. Later that day, I found out from my sister, who called me sounding more confused than anything, that our mom had told her I was making rules instead of asking for help. She said I had laid down expectations like I was hiring staff, that I was being dramatic and controlling, trying to make everything about me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her back and remind her that I'm the one about to push a baby out of my body, that I'm not looking for a housekeeper, I'm looking for my mother, for someone who claims to love me to show up when I need her most. But instead, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone heavy in my hand, wondering why I had ever let myself hope for something different. I snapped when she called again just a few days before Jake was scheduled to leave. I had been holding it in for so long, through her dismissive laughter, through the passive-aggressive messages she sent my sister, through the gut-wrenching stress of knowing I'd be giving birth without my husband, that when I heard her voice chirp, "So what exactly do you expect me to be doing while I'm there?" something inside me cracked. I didn't ease into it. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her, with every ounce of exhaustion and frustration in my body, that I was not going to attend to her while dealing with bleeding nipples, a stitched-up abdomen, and a screaming newborn. I told her this wasn't about her needing a comfortable mattress or a meal plan or entertainment. This was about me, her daughter, preparing to go through one of the most physically and emotionally draining experiences of her life without her husband by her side. And if she couldn't understand that, then maybe she shouldn't come at all. There was a long pause on the line, and then her voice, quiet and defensive, said, "But you didn't say you wanted help." I could have screamed. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Because I had said it, over and over again, I had laid it out clearly, gently, even timidly, practically begging for something that shouldn't have required explanation. But in her mind, unless I used some specific phrasing or made her feel praised for showing up, it didn't count. And that moment made something incredibly clear to me: she hadn't been listening at all. We hardly spoke to each other after that last call, not even a text from her to check in or ask how I was doing, which at that point honestly felt like a relief. The silence between us was heavy, but it was easier to carry than the constant tension of trying to get her to see me, to hear me, to just show up like a mother should. Jake left for work a few days later, and even though he tried to stay strong for me, I could see it in his eyes, how much it hurt him to leave, how torn he felt knowing he wouldn't be there when Caleb arrived. We hugged for what felt like forever at the airport, both of us pretending we were okay, even though neither of us believed it. When I got home, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for a long time. Not just because I missed him already, or because my back hurt, or because the baby was kicking like he was trying to rearrange my insides, but because I felt completely alone. And then, almost without thinking, I picked up my phone and called Jake's mom, Linda. I hadn't planned to ask her for anything. I just wanted to hear a familiar, kind voice, someone who would talk to me like I mattered, like this wasn't just some phase I had to tough out alone. I told her how the last few weeks had been, how Jake had tried so hard to come home and couldn't, how I had hoped my mom would be the one to step in but that things hadn't gone the way I needed them to. I didn't even get through half of it before she interrupted me, not with judgment or hesitation, but with the kind of warmth that made my throat tighten. "I'll come," she said immediately and without condition. "Just say the word. I'll be there." And in that moment I felt a wave of something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. Not just because help was on the way, but because someone had chosen to be there. Because she saw me. Because I didn't have to beg. My mother-in-law arrived a full week earlier than planned, suitcase in hand and eyes full of concern, and the moment I opened the door and saw her standing there, I felt like I could finally exhale for the first time in what felt like months. She didn't hesitate, didn't make me feel like I owed her anything, didn't even wait for me to ask. She just hugged me tightly and said, "You're not doing this alone." And right then I knew we had made the right choice. Jake and I had already decided not to tell my mom she was coming. We both knew how that would go, how the guilt tripping would follow, how she would twist it into some betrayal, some personal offense, instead of acknowledging that she had failed to show up when I needed her most. So when she texted me to check in, one of the rare messages she sent these days, I simply replied that I had a few local friends willing to help if anything came up. I told her not to worry. It wasn't true, not really, but it was the version of the truth that came with the least emotional fallout. And for once I didn't feel bad about it. I was done bending over backwards to make her feel comfortable while I was the one limping through late pregnancy, exhausted and bracing for labor without my husband. I had someone who showed up, someone who didn't need convincing or coaxing, someone who came just because she cared. That was enough. Linda became the support I hadn't even realized I was desperate for. From the moment she walked into our home, she moved with this quiet, steady kindness that made everything feel a little more manageable. She started cooking meals without needing to be asked, simple things that filled the house with warmth, soups, casseroles, fresh muffins in the morning, and every time I stepped into the kitchen, something smelled like comfort. She folded laundry as if it were second nature, humming to herself, and never once made me feel guilty for sitting on the couch in my pajamas with swollen feet and a tired heart. When Caleb was born, everything changed in a blur of exhaustion, stitches, and overwhelming love, and Linda was there through it all. She waited in the hospital without complaint, held my hand when Jake couldn't be there, and cried softly the first time she saw her grandson's face. Once we were home, she took over the things I didn't even have the strength to ask for: walking the baby when he was fussy, cleaning up the never-ending trail of burp cloths and bottles, sitting next to me during late-night feeds just to keep me company. She held Caleb so I could sleep. She watched him while I took my first real shower in days, the kind where you can finally breathe again. She didn't act like she was doing me a favor. She just did it because that's what love looks like. And somewhere in the chaos and recovery and new mom fog, I realized that Linda had stepped into a role I had been aching for. Someone who simply showed up without needing to be the center of everything. She was the mother I needed in every way that mattered. The birth was long and grueling, 26 hours of pain that felt like it would never end, wave after wave of contractions that left me shaking and breathless, the hours blurring together under the harsh hospital lights. But through every second of it, Linda was there. She never left my side. She sat with me through the early labor, talking to me softly when I was anxious, rubbing my back when the pain started to sharpen, holding a cool cloth to my forehead when I was too hot and too tired to move. And when it got worse, when the contractions were crashing down like thunder and I was crying from the sheer exhaustion of it all, she held my hand so tightly I could feel her strength pulsing through our fingers. She didn't flinch when I yelled or sobbed or begged for it to be over. She just stayed, calm and steady, the way only someone who's been through it herself can be. When Caleb finally came into the world, red-faced and screaming, everything slowed down for a moment, like time gave me a few precious seconds to remember forever. And Linda, without me even having to ask, reached for her phone and began to take pictures. Not staged or posed, but raw, beautiful snapshots of those first moments. Me holding him for the first time, crying and laughing at the same time. His tiny fingers curled around mine. The look on my face when I realized he was finally here. She captured it all so Jake could feel like he hadn't missed everything, so he could see what I saw when I met our son. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay her for what she did that day. She wasn't just my mother-in-law. In those hours, she was my rock, my advocate, my witness, and my quiet anchor through one of the most vulnerable experiences of my life. My mom didn't write a single word on the day I gave birth. Not a message, not a call, not even a simple "thinking of you" text, as if the moment her grandson entered the world simply didn't register as important enough to acknowledge. I kept glancing at my phone between contractions, half expecting something, anything, even just a thumbs up emoji, but there was nothing. And by the time Caleb was finally in my arms and everything had gone quiet in that hospital room, I realized I shouldn't have been surprised. The next day, after a night of very little sleep and a blur of nurses, feedings, and staring at my baby's perfect face in total disbelief, I picked up the phone and called her. I thought maybe she didn't know the timing, maybe she had a reason, maybe, just maybe, she'd sound relieved or excited or something close to proud. But the moment she answered, her voice came through sharp and irritated, and her first words weren't congratulations or, "How are you feeling?" or even, "Is the baby okay?" Instead, she snapped, "Why didn't you call earlier?" I sat there, still in a hospital gown, sore and emotionally drained, blinking at the wall with the phone pressed to my ear, stunned by how fast she could make me feel like I'd done something wrong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever once considered how hard it was, how much I had gone through in the last 24 hours, and if maybe, just maybe, she could show up for me in some small, meaningful way. But instead, I just closed my eyes and quietly told her, because I was having a baby. 2 weeks later, out of nowhere, my mom called me. I was sitting on the couch with Caleb sleeping in my arms, the house finally quiet after another long, sleepless night, when her name lit up on my phone. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, bracing myself for another round of guilt-tripping or passive-aggressive comments, but something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe hope, made me pick up. Her voice sounded softer than usual, almost unsure, and after a moment of awkward silence, she said she wanted to apologize. She told me she regretted not being there during my pregnancy, that she had been wrong to brush me off and make me feel like I was asking for too much. She admitted that she hadn't handled things well, that she had let her pride and stubbornness get in the way, and that not being part of Caleb's birth had made her realize how much she had missed. She said she wanted to see me, to meet her grandson, to try and make things right. And against my better judgment, against the part of me that still remembered the sting of her laugh, the cold silence on the day I gave birth, the way she twisted everything into something about herself, I agreed. Maybe it was because I wanted to believe people can change, or maybe because some part of me still needed her to try. We planned a 6-day visit. I would stay at her place, just me and Caleb, while Jake was still deployed and Linda had returned home. I told myself it was short, that I could handle it, that maybe this would be the moment she finally stepped up, not as a grandmother but as my mother. Those 6 days were hell, and I don't use that word lightly. From the moment I stepped into her house with Caleb in my arms, I felt the weight of my mistake pressing down on me. She had promised change, but what I walked into was the same pattern wrapped in a softer tone and false promises. The first night, when Caleb finally settled after a long, fussy stretch, I asked her to please let him sleep, that he needed the rest and so did I. But she ignored me completely, walked into the room, scooped him up without asking, and woke him just so she could hold him and bond. When I gently asked her not to do that again, she waved me off, saying I was being too controlling and needed to relax, that babies cry and I shouldn't be so uptight. She didn't help with meals, didn't lift a finger to do laundry or even wash a bottle. I was still healing, sore and exhausted, running on broken sleep and hormonal fog, and yet somehow I was the one still cooking dinner, holding Caleb through his witching hour, and cleaning up after her like I was the guest in her home. One night, she fell asleep with him in her arms on the couch, his tiny head resting in a position that made my chest tighten with panic. I gently but firmly took him from her arms, and she snapped awake and accused me of being dramatic. "You're exaggerating," she said, like I was making it up, like every instinct screaming in my chest was invalid. I felt like I was suffocating. I had gone there with the tiniest sliver of hope that maybe things would be different, that maybe I would finally feel mothered. But instead, I was reminded over and over again of why I had stopped expecting anything from her in the first place. And when I broke down one afternoon, completely overwhelmed, tears streaming down my face as I told her that Jake's deployment had just been extended and he wouldn't be coming home for another 3 months, she just sat there and said, "I'm sorry." No hug, no warmth, no movement from her chair. Just those 2 words, flat and hollow, like she was responding to something on the news, not her own daughter who was falling apart in front of her. I sat there with Caleb in my arms, my heart splitting open, feeling completely alone even with another adult in the room. I didn't need a grand gesture. I didn't need a miracle. I just needed my mother to act like one. I needed her to put down her pride for 5 seconds and just be present, to reach out, to offer anything, comfort, support, presence. But there was nothing. Just that distant look in her eyes and that cold, indifferent apology that told me everything I didn't want to believe. And in that moment it hit me, not just disappointment but grief. Real, aching grief for the mother I never had, the one I kept hoping would show up, the one I kept trying to find in the woman who only ever met me halfway. I realized I wasn't just angry. I was mourning something that never existed. And maybe it was time to stop trying. Maybe it was time to step back, limit contact again, protect the little piece I had left. Because I have a son now. And he deserves a mother who doesn't look for love in places it's never been.